You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, obviously the major story right now as far as Donald Trump's cabinet nominations are concerned is Kash Patel as the possible FBI director. So I want to read a passage from an interview that he did with Steve Bannon that's gotten a lot of attention in the last few days. He says, "We're going to come after people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you. Whether it's criminally or civilly, we'll figure that out." Now, first things first here. Are you able to go after people for a crime that is quite literally a figment of your imagination? This notion that he can go after people who, quote, helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. There's no evidence that he did that. That is a conspiracy theory. And so is he able to wield the FBI, the tools of the FBI, in order to go after people for something that quite literally doesn't exist?
No, not in a law-abiding way, not ethically, not constitutionally. And frankly, Brian, and I've seen that clip a couple of times now, that statement alone, in my opinion, disqualifies Kash Patel from being the director of the FBI. It is mind-boggling to me as a rule of law guy for 30 years, a federal prosecutor. We never say anything before an investigation has been conducted, while an investigation is being conducted. Frankly, the only time we talk at all is basically either when an indictment is returned by a grand jury after a full, fair, thorough investigation that has revealed crimes were committed, there's enough evidence to indict someone for those crimes, then basically, as Department of Justice officials and employees, we can have a press conference saying today the grand jury returned indictments against defendant so-and-so for the following crimes. And then we go back kind of off-grid until after the jury trial. And then if a jury convicts somebody of those crimes, we step out onto the courthouse steps and say, we are heartened that the jury concluded that, the evidence proved guilt beyond a reasonable doubt and the sentencing date is set for so-and-so. When somebody like Kash Patel, who, Donald Trump wants to make director of the FBI, stands up and says, we're going to go after people for committing crimes by helping Joe Biden rig an election, he goes one step further and he says, you know what? I don't know if they're criminal. I don't know if they're civil, but we'll come up with something. That's disqualifying. And I can only hope that the Senate, in its advise and consent capacity, grills Kash Patel and realizes that if he's made director of the FBI, everybody loses. Everybody in America loses. The FBI loses all of its legitimacy. And, that may be Donald Trump's goal to, burn down all of the institutions of government. But, the FBI is still the preeminent law enforcement agency in the United States, going after things like drug trafficking, gun trafficking, sex trafficking, counterterrorism. And to put Kash Patel in charge of that agency would be bad for all Americans.
Glenn, to what extent could the people who currently staff the FBI, assuming Donald Trump doesn't go in day one, enact Schedule F, purge the FBI of career prosecutors, and replace them with loyalists who may or may not have any understanding or adherence to the Constitution, but rather loyalty to Donald Trump, to what extent would Kash Patel face resistance from people whose adherence is to the law and not just to Donald Trump? You have the FBI director who is everybody's boss there, but at the same time, if he's doing something that is overtly not only illegal, but antithetical to the very mission of the FBI, this isn't like an easy position. I know that you're not going to say, it's simply that you just got to follow orders, like regardless of how legal they are, but at the same time, it's probably not going to be that easy to just discard the will of the person who's in charge of the FBI.
It won't be easy, but it will be critical for the good men and women of the FBI, the special agents who actually take deadly seriously their oath of loyalty to the Constitution, not to the director, not to the president, not to any person. It may not be easy, but I'll tell you, I am counting on them, and I believe they will stand up to any illegality, to any unethical directives that Kash Patel might give. And, here's what I'm reminded of. When you ask that question, how will the rank and file FBI special agents respond to a Kash Patel? Here's something that Bill Barr, of all people, said when during the first Trump administration, Donald Trump was floating the idea of making Kash Patel the deputy director of the FBI. Here is what Bill Barr said to then Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. He said, yeah, over my dead body. And he said that shows that Trump has a, quote, shocking detachment from reality, even suggesting that Kash Patel could be the number 2 guy at the FBI because, Bill Barr's words, he, Patel, will never be able to command the respect necessary to run the day-to-day operations of the FBI. Rarely do I quote Bill Barr as authority for any proposition, but boy, he was dead on the money there. And I think that answers the question, what will the rank and file do if Kash Patel sets them on an illegal mission? You know, I expect they will buck him. I expect they will out him. I expect they will report him. And maybe at some point, some of those same agents will be applying for an arrest warrant for Kash Patel if he acts unlawfully.
Well, can we dig into this a little bit? Because I admittedly don't have any profound or even cursory understanding of how the FBI works, but can you have people who serve under somebody like the FBI director who have any ability to flex their muscles to somebody in a higher position? Like, would an underling be able to exercise any authority over the FBI director?
When you say authority, maybe not authority, but first of all, the Attorney General sits atop the director of the FBI, and there are agencies within the Department of Justice where you can report misconduct by your superiors. We've got an Inspector General's office. We have an Office of Professional Responsibility. And of course, we have whistleblower statutes and laws and protections. Remember when I think it was the General Counsel for the intelligence community had to report out to Congress that ultimately we learned it was Colonel Alexander Vindman who reported some obvious wrongdoing by then President Donald Trump on that corrupt phone call with President Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, where he was basically extorting and bribing President Zelensky. So yes, there are mechanisms, there are offices and organizations within the Department of Justice. Of course, the FBI is part of the Department of Justice. So yes, the subordinates of a Kash Patel will have any number of places to go to report, alleged crime and abuse by their boss, the director.
Glenn, is the fact that we already know Kash Patel's end game here, is it that he's come out and said that he wants to, just prosecute whether civilly or criminally, it doesn't matter. This is basically a conclusion in search of evidence. Is him simply saying that going to serve as a basis for any potential prosecutions or lawsuits to be undermined in court, because those people can just say, look, he already said that, he's going to go after people for a completely baseless foundation, this idea that, they helped Joe Biden commit fraud in an election where there was no fraud. So is his past words going to serve as a basis to undermine these eventual prosecutions?
Yeah, so I predict that if charges are brought against people that are baseless, that are vindictive, that are part of Donald Trump's promised revenge and retribution against his enemies, you are absolutely going to see those statements by Kash Patel offered as evidence by the defense attorneys representing these people who are being vindictively prosecuted as evidence of precisely that, a vindictive prosecution. And, in the criminal law, vindictive prosecution is a legal doctrine that can result in a judge dismissing the charges against the person who is being vindictively prosecuted. In fact, if it's bad enough, the misconduct that the government, meaning the FBI and the prosecutors, are engaging in, the charges can be dismissed with prejudice, which means there is no curing whatever it is that Kash Patel did that proved it was a vindictive prosecution. But here's the other thing, Brian. Just as I believe the good men and women of the FBI, the special agents, will stand up to wrongdoing by their director, don't forget, to get a case into court, there are a lot of checks along the way. There are federal prosecutors who would have to be willing to join in Kash Patel's conspiracy to vindictively prosecute people. Then you'd have to corrupt the grand jury or present them evidence that didn't exist, like about Joe Biden criminally rigging an election. Then you'd have to convince judges when motions to dismiss were filed. Then you'd have to convince a trial jury. You know what? Let Kash Patel try, Kash Patel will be on the losing end of that battle.
And let's finish off with this. Let's say that the Senate Republicans opt not to show some spine, which I know is a shocking prospect. But try to wrap your head around that notion that Senate Republicans ultimately do opt to confirm someone like Kash Patel as FBI director. What would Kash Patel be able to do specifically at the FBI to, if not prosecute people, make their lives difficult in a way that is, again, based on his effort to wage war against Donald Trump's perceived enemies?
He could set the agenda and even direct FBI agents to begin looking at certain people, certain organizations, media organizations, for example. Now, in order for the FBI to open a criminal probe, there has to be what's called adequate predication. That is a fancy term for enough evidence, some credible evidence, albeit it's a very low bar, minimal criminal evidence, showing that a crime has been committed and a particular person may have committed it. So absent that showing, again, I don't expect FBI agents, if given an unlawful directive, to start investigating somebody without any evidence supporting that directive. I wouldn't expect them to necessarily follow those orders, but Kash Patel can do his worst and say, you know what, here is Donald Trump's enemies list. Let's have a look. Here are the people I want you to target. Find something on them. That would not be a lawful exercise of the power and authority of the FBI. So, but it's hard to predict what he might try to do, how far he might be willing to go in service to dear leader.
Glenn, is the prospect of Kash Patel being confirmed as FBI director, is that number one on your list in terms of which cabinet picks are the most worrisome for you?
Matt Gaetz was problematic. I'm glad that at least the reporting is a number of Republican senators made it clear, whether publicly or behind the scenes, they wouldn't support it, so his name had to be withdrawn. Pam Bondi is somebody we're going to have to be talking about because she has made similarly, let's call them inappropriate statements on Fox News that, we're going to prosecute the prosecutors, the bad ones, and we're going to investigate the investigators. Again, she has no evidence to make that assertion based on, and yet, not unlike Kash Patel, she's jumping out and saying those things, at least on Fox News. So I think Kash Patel is right up there, but I have a concern about Tulsi Gabbard. I have a concern about Kennedy. I think this is just a rogues gallery of cabinet members, and I think if ever the Senate's advice and consent role to make sure that any presidential nominees are going to serve the American people well and honorably, if ever that role was important, it's probably at its zenith of importance right now.
Yeah, I think that's well put. With that said, of course, Glenn and I will continue to cover this as more news comes out about Donald Trump's cabinet nominees or as the confirmation process plays itself out. So for those who are watching right now, if you want to stay on top of this, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. That's also the best way to stay on top of everything that happens as we enter this period of uncertainty that surrounds the Trump administration. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.